Okay, I think I should be back up. Let me know if I'm not. Okay, it looks like at least I'm good on Mob Crush, but that is actually the problem. That's what's causing me to get cut off. Let me pop over to the social medias real quick. And I apologize if we get any Inception audio. That's not the goal here. Okay, it looks like we're still good on Facebook. I think we're still good on Facebook. I don't want to listen to the audio back. Back. Okay, so Facebook's back. Let's see. YouTube back. Adrian, let me know if YouTube's back. I believe it is because I see. Yeah, okay. So I see it there on the channel. I apologize, guys. Don't know what's going on with that. That's the second time that's happened to me. It just cuts out and I don't know why. There's no error message, there's no emails, there's no nothing. So awesome. Well, at least we're back. Let me pull up in that spreadsheet again. Let me browse through real quick and find the questions that we weren't able to get to that pertain to audio. There were a couple in here and they're just buried. Question for James. Okay, so Adrian, you were asking like the auditorium setup for Mosaic. So Mosaic with its hard concrete floor, its concrete half walls, and then it's painted, all the concrete's painted. So the interesting thing about, well, really all materials is they all have an acoustic property, even concrete. So when it's cinder block, it has a certain amount of diffusion and absorption, and when it's, you know, gloss sealed concrete, it's got completely different properties, obviously. And when you paint it, that completely changes those properties. So any benefit that Mosaic was getting with the cinder block, when they painted it, completely turned it into more of a reflective surface. Same goes for their corkboard traps that they have on the back wall. As soon as they painted them, they sealed that surface up and created more reflection. So it stopped acting like that. So you're saying that you have a similar setup to Mosaic, no sound treatment, and do you have drums in a full enclosure? How do you control cymbal bleed into the Singer microphones and in the room? And those are some of the things we would like to improve. Okay, so first things first, whether or not you have a drum booth or total cage or total drum booth is completely up to your entire team, your leadership team, and how they feel about that kind of aesthetic. They are not small. They can be about 7 foot tall. They can be over 10 feet wide, sometimes 8 to 10 feet wide. And they can be pretty deep, 15 feet deep, 12 to 15 feet deep, maybe even more. So they can be pretty big. They are very effective, and there's good ones out there. The ones that have the round front and the squared off back and all the acoustic treatment on all the walls except for the round plexi front, they're pretty good as long as they're built well. I have been in ones that sound really good that don't have a weird node right in the center, and I've been in ones that weren't designed and built so well that they have definite reflection point right in the center. So you got to be careful of that. At Mosaic, what we did is we used the shy baffles. Now, if you're not familiar with the shy baffles, those are those round, clear plexiglass baffles that you put in front of the speakers that you can barely see on camera at all. They mount on cymbal stands, and they did a lot to help the cymbal bleed in the Singer microphones, but they did nothing for the room. And the reason is because that sound just keeps shooting up, down to the floor, up to the ceiling, off the back walls, and reflecting back out into the room. So they do nothing for that. As far as the sound in the room, if you're not going to use a drum enclosure, you have to work with the drummers. I mean, for many years, drummers with drum kits would play small jazz clubs and tiny rooms and do just fine. And our culture for worship has become smash and bash almost. And we've got to swing back a little bit where we can play with energy and look like we're playing with a lot of energy, but control our hits. Being a former drummer myself, I understand this. I'm sure some of you guys out there are drummers as well. But it comes all down to how the drummer plays the drums. Now, this actually is a benefit when you control that, because when you hit a drum too hard or a cymbal too hard, they actually choke on themselves and they sound more like cardboard boxes or plastic, and or they sound real. The cymbals will sound shrill and short, and or they'll wash. Some of them will wash too much. So in the old studio days, or still in the, not the old studios, but now in the studio days still, the drummers, session drummers, good session drummers will play really consistent dynamics on the kick, typically speaking, unless it's jazz and it needs more inflection, or some other genre that needs a lot more inflection with the kick and the snare. But you'll play the kick and the snare relatively consistent in a medium dynamic, and you'll play the toms sort of there too. You won't hit the toms too soft ever. You'll keep it in a nice dynamic window, and you'll play the cymbals really sort of in a lighter dynamic. They sound prettier that way, and after everything is compressed and pulled together in a mix, they're going to get louder anyway. So you want them to sound good, and let the mixing process bring the levels of all of what you're doing back to a more what you would think should sound like if you're bashing really hard. So that's how we control it in the room. If you go for a drum cage, obviously that's going to be really good control, but has an aesthetic impact, and it may have a sonic impact depending on how much money you spend on that cage. The middle ground between the shy baffles and the full cage is just a or full booth, I should say, is the drum cage, which is a shield that goes around the whole front of the drum kit. Same problem there. That'll help you with some of the front row impact from the drums. It'll help you with cymbals in the microphone, but it won't help you with the entire room. So I hope that answers that question. If you want more elaboration, just put it in the chat. We're gonna keep coming down. Tips on, let's see. What are some tips on increasing production and value? So I'm guessing like the overall quality of everything. This includes sound. Kim was asking that. Production value is, I mean, that can be pretty subjective. You got people like Bon Iver who will use torn up burlap and beaten up instruments and things like that, and that adds to his production value because that's what he's going for. So if you have to find your target, figure out what it is you want to get to, and then do that well. Find out how other people who are doing similar things to that are doing that and how they're achieving that, and see what you can feasibly and viably bring into your workflow. For audio, listen to tons of music, tons of great broadcasts, and get to know what sounds good. And try to do that with what tools you have in your hand, and then down the road, like we were saying on the webinar today, get really good with what you have, and then when you add the tools later, it just gets so much easier, so much better. But like I said, like I've always said, people have used consoles alone for so many years and produced so many great records and so many great live streams or broadcast mixes that some of these bells and whistles that we have today, which are fantastic, they aren't needed, or not needed as much as we think they are. Let's see. Adrian says, yes, you absolutely can, Adrian. DM me. Adrian's asking if you can send me the broadcast, some of their recordings for some feedback. You absolutely can do that. Just hit me up with the links to them in a DM, and I will be going over them. I can go over them on stream, or I can go over them privately, whichever you prefer. Let's see. Audio question: when mixing front of house, in-ears, monitors, and broadcast from one Digico SD8 console, what is the best way to get the best overall stereo balance to broadcast? Okay, when you're playing all the roles from one console, gain staging is always important. It's always important no matter what. But when you're doing that, you want to set for the stage first, set for the room first. Set for the stage. Hold on, we used to have something we would say about this. Set for the room, so you're gaining everything, and then bring the ears in so that you're not making any crazy adjustments. So that's like gain. So you would gain up for your console to nominal, and then you'd bring your ears up where they need to be, so you're not fighting too much there. And then and all of your effects, get those all dialed in, and that'll lead to the ears don't really have an impact for the broadcast side of it, but doing it that way should lead to a better broadcast mix. You want to be aware of what the general transition value is, and we'll look at some of these tonight when we go through some live streams. But worship is a lot of inputs at one time, It can be anywhere from 12 inputs to 48 or more inputs, depending on the size of your band and how many mics you have on stage and all of that. And that's a lot of things that you are compressing and putting together, and you increase your overall loudness. Even though your meters will sort of float in a certain range where you think they are, the overall loudness is much higher. And that's because the dynamic window or the dynamic range is much smaller. That will lead to, if you were to just use your top value for your meter, like your peak value, and you would set your mics at the same, your speaking mics to the same level, you're going to hear your worship really loud and your speaking mics really soft. And you'll be like, but the meters match. Well, it's actually a perceived volume thing. And there's a way to meter for this. They call it RMS. It's, I believe it's root means root. I'm not going to try to explain the math. It's basically, on average, it's peak -3, roughly. It's a really rudimentary way to meter it. We used to use it all the time in the studio. We've moved on to LUFS or LKFS, so loudness. So looking at measuring in loudness rather than just the old school peak and RMS. And there's a lot of great papers on that, but I'll show you some of that tonight. So what I do is I normally set all of my worship inputs on my broadcast mix, so my broadcast aux. I'll bring those contributions to that mix down to -15 or -17, somewhere in that ballpark. So when you flip to fader on that broadcast mix, all my worship's down at -15 or -17, and they are post fader. Everything's post fader to my broadcast mix so that it's doing what I want it to do. Sorry, my voice is. I did a lot of talking today, so my voice is a little bit squeaky. And then that includes my singing mic. So everything that happens in that section of my services, they're down at -15, -17. My speaking mics, they're all going to be at 0. And then all of my stereo playbacks, any music, like Spotify or whatever, or any of my stereo video channels, they'll all be at like -3. Remember, because they're stereo channels, there's a lot more content there, and I'm going to bring them back -3 so that usually when I set that way for the room and I bring that fader up for the room, when it goes to live stream, it's relatively the right level. Obviously, you meter that and you check it afterwards. As far as stereo width and balance goes, you want to. Usually you can get away with whatever stereo panning you have going on, unless there's something specifically you're struggling with. For Mosaic, when we were doing a lot of it, we were, some of the guys were starting with panning the drums all the way hard left and right, and we were getting some feedback from some great engineers saying that was a little distracting when you have a drum over here and then a drum over here. So we were panning them in a little bit. So we were bringing our toms in a little bit to focus that, because it's a drum set on a stage and you're watching that stage, right? So if the drums are more or less over here on the image, you don't want a drum way over here on your ear and a drum way over here. You want to focus them in a little bit, keep the width there, right? Because it's still music, but focusing it in helps it be less distracting. It helps it feel like a total band that you're watching. Some of the old Beatles recordings actually would pan the whole drum set onto one side. We don't really do that anymore. You can do it if you want to get super creative. By all means, break the rules. But we don't. That's not very typical, and people will probably ask you about it more often than they'll enjoy it. So read the audience. I think Chad was talking about that. Know your audience a little bit, or maybe that was Doug. Let's see. That's a question for camera operators. I do not know much about that. Let's see. There's a lot of questions that came in today, so I'm just scrolling through. We got a lot of questions of planning to upgrade live stream equipment, right? I believe it was. Let's see, we got like 4 or 5 questions about equipment. People just jumping into this. It depends on where your church is at for equipment. I mean, there's the new Blackmagic 8M Pros, the little broadcaster. What is that called? Let me look that up real quick. Everybody's like buying them off the shelf. They were like back ordered forever. Blackmagic. I'll pull that up. You guys may all already know about it. 8M Mini Pro. That's what it is. That's got an encoder built into it, so you can generate your visual mix, and it'll have your audio embedded on however you bring your audio in. But you can put your streaming service right into it and stream right out. which is pretty fantastic. It's a great little, I think it's about 500 to 1,000 depending on which model you get, which is actually pretty affordable for what you're getting there. Other ways to do it, you can use a Mac. OBS is free. It's open broadcaster system or something like that. There's quite a lot of OBS-like apps that are free because it's an open platform, and a lot of people have built front ends for them. And you would just need a capture device of some kind. So like a Elgato's got a bunch, just a way to get your video signal in. Obviously, you can do Blackmagic Mini Recorder or something else, like the HyperDeck Studios, I believe they are, to get your image in, and then the software will help encode you using your CPU or GPU, and send it out. There's a lot of resource online on how to set that up. I recommend using a PC because OBS is only recently, I think it may still be in beta for Mac, so it's technically it's an open platform, so there's going to always be bugs even though they're always developing it. So I use a PC to stream. I recommend people consider using a PC to stream if you're doing the OBS side. Getting audio in is as easy as an interface or Dante or something like that. It doesn't cost a whole lot. As far as I mean, you could, like we were talking about today, you could use an iPhone and just do it that way. Make sure your audio is good. I came across a few where there was just iPhone audio from the room, and that's not so great because you will wind up hearing more of the room than the direct sound, and that makes your stream hard to understand. So let's see. Is there a benchmark for standard that we can keep for quality for online services? Check. Well, there's some benchmarks you can use for audio in terms of volume and things like that, but it's really your service. It's your culture. So that's your benchmark. What's your culture? What's your leadership team? What's your creative team wanting to do? Let's see. Keep going here. Sorry, guys. I'm just skimming through questions. Oh, yeah. The music in multiple locations because of social distancing. I haven't used any of the collaboration pieces, but what I would do is I would generate a click track with the arrangement and some form of backing, a keyboard or a guitar, and sing to it. And then I'd send that out to all of my team that we're going to be recording and ask them to record over it. A lot of churches are doing this really well. The reason I would do that way is because the time it would take for your signal to go across the internet to the other people and then have them come back is you're going to have some crazy latency. I'm sure there's probably some fancy platforms that are trying to compensate for that, but it's just easier to do it in post, not live. And I could be wrong. That's an area I could learn a lot more about, actually. How do we justify the use of all these ever newer technologies? You justify it based on where your church is at, really. I was with one church where their online platform was really a campus, so it got justified by a whole campus budget. And they put a lot of money into their online platform. I mean, they're using Akamai CDN, which is a content delivery, and Haivision platform, which is extremely robust encoding platform. And you know, that's not cheap stuff. Versus a PC and OBS. Like, the thing is, you can get on into some of these platforms for fairly inexpensive and not have to do that $70,000+ route before you even talk about cameras. So considering the price of what it would take to do something like that versus some of these other things, I mean, that there might be a justification and say, hey, it doesn't actually need to cost us $125,000 to do this. We could do it on a couple grand, maybe even a couple $100. I'm just going to keep scrolling through. I know there was another question that I copied that popped up. I think this is the last one when I find it. Oh yeah, there's a couple here. Okay, cool. while not being okay, this is actually a good one I want to answer. So we'll have a couple more. How do you balance being creative with your church production elements while not being overproduced or too distracting? I think you just got to have a subjective gauge of authenticity, right? If you got a ton of auto-tune going on and it's audible and you're using a ton of samples and it's apparent, you know, all these things that you're just doing for the sake of doing them, it becomes, you know, people are a pretty good gauge of what my grandma might say BS, right? So they'll pick up on it a lot faster than we will, but they'll also pick up on authenticity right away. So, and I'm not saying dumb down your production value just for authenticity's sake, but whatever you do it because you're trying to better your craft for you know, your church, your worship, your God. So if you stay authentic with it, then, you know, there becomes no, if somebody does have a question about being overproduced, well, that conversation's easy at that point because you're authentic about why you're doing it, and you're saying, well, we really want to bring our best, and we can bring these things, so why wouldn't we? You know, that's the Cain and Abel conversation. So as long as it's authentic, I mean, add what you think is appropriate for your culture and where your heart of worship is at, right? How do you get to monitor your live stream mix when you're mixing for front of house and live stream simultaneously from the same mixing console? What's your advice in terms of getting a better live stream? That's a tricky question. Okay, I had to do this at my last church before I was helping Mosaic. What I had to do is I started listening back to the live streams either on Sunday afternoon when there was no service or on Monday when I got back to my desk. And I started to learn what I was doing in terms of what I was hearing in the headphones, that I was using. I would start to equate that. So I use a set of 7506s from Sony 7506s. They aren't the best headphones in the world. They're maybe not even the most accurate, but I know them. I've had them. Those have been my front of house headphones for almost 20 years. I get a new set every once in a while, but that model has been my beat up front of house headphones. So when I listen to those headphones, I trust them. I know them very well. So when I hear something and I want to make a change, I can trust that decision that I'm making because I know those headphones. So for me, I would listen to those things. I would make adjustments in those headphones and then listen back to them when the PA wasn't on and make sure that, you know, I was heading in the right direction. I would even pull up my live stream. So your live streams could be anywhere from 7 seconds to a minute and a half or 5 minutes, depending on how long your delay loop is on purpose. Your live stream will be behind. And the other cool thing is when you're live streaming to places like Facebook and YouTube, you can scroll back. So when I was in, you know, parts of the service where I could afford to do this, I probably would listen to the sermon in the first service or something. But I would listen back even during the service. I'd throw my headphones on and listen on my phone and scroll back and just check and make sure that what I was doing was sounding right while the PA was much quieter. And then I could make some small tweaks while the service was going on before we got to the last song. And then the next services throughout the day would sound better. So that's a tip, but always listen back when you're not mixing worship or you're not, later on in the week or something. Listen back and know the changes. How do you maintain a balance between different musicians who have different ideologies over how they should sound? Do you tune to their taste or the audience or the senior? I always tune to the senior pastor. That's an easy question. That's an easy answer. If your senior pastor is making calls on that stuff, go with it. If the worship pastor is empowered by your senior pastor to make the call, go with that. Always defer, always bring them into that conversation. Those conversations don't have to be hard. Everything comes out of relationships. So I have always strived to build really great relationships with my entire teams, vocalists, the musicians, everybody. So that if I brought an idea or a critique to any one of those people, they trusted it, and they listened, right? So big problems are people who sound check at one volume and then turn all the way up for service because they, at some point in their life, got burnt or just don't understand how the front of house guy is tasked to manage the room. Having a quick conversation about, hey, when you do that, you could actually distort on the console because I'm trying to maintain good gain staging, and then you're going to throw the mix way off and it's going to be distracting when you do it. even if I try to account for that, just have a heart to heart with them and say, if you trust me to bring you in and put you where you need to be and then bring you up when you have those spots, like that's what I'm looking out for. That's what I'm listening for. Man, that goes a lot longer than, man, why'd you turn up again? Well, you got to sound check quieter. Have the conversation, talk about the whys. So on Edge, Mark says, over on Twitch, it's really amusing when people make changes in production based on congregation feedback. That church is going nowhere. It's interesting. I served under Carl Lentz for a long time, and he's extremely loving and extremely gracious. And he used to say, if you don't like our church, then we have an entire team that will help you find a great ministry that you will enjoy. Because he was about making sure people had an opportunity to connect with God. And if something we were doing as a church was distracting for those people, well, we knew so many churches in New York that we could take them to and say, hey, well, what about this one? Not that we want to lose people. That really wasn't a concern. The concern was connecting people to a community where they can worship. So yeah, that's sort of the mentality I've always grown up. We don't listen to congregation feedback almost ever. Because it's almost always based on subjectivity, and it could be based on bias or bitterness. And at best it means that person might need a little bit of love. That's all it means. Some of the people that complain about it's too loud, if they're elderly or whatever, I would know where the quieter seats in the room were, and I would, with a smile and love, show them where they could sit. And they were good seats. They weren't really bad seats, but I would say, if it's bothering you to sit right in front of house, how about this seat over here down on the floor, first row of the bowl, where it's right in that gap where the PA just shoots over, or whatever it is. But knowing those things about my room is good. So I'm out of questions from the NAM stuff that we missed. If I missed one that you asked for whatever reason, post it in the chat, in the comments there, and I'll get to it. But I'm going to go ahead and shut that Word document down and flip over to the other computer so we can go through some of the live streams together. Mark says over on Twitch, went to Willow once, heard people and heard OP sitting under the balcony quiet splits in the room. Yeah. No, yeah, people will always say what they think, and there may not be a reality, but you just gotta love them. You gotta realize that whatever they're saying is coming from whatever place it's coming from, and it's our job to be sensitive to that. So that is what it is. So let me pull out the Spotify, and we'll flip on the mix rig. If the live streams that we're about to listen to are too loud, please let me know. And I gotta turn the mix rig shut down on me, so give it a second. Yep, passwords. Oh boy. There we go. All right, I think this particular stream that we had up is East Ridge, which I think is our friend Keith who's on. That was the first one. I'm actually going to flip over to that computer because it's a little too small for me to see through OBS. So let me just do that now. If any of you are on here and you see me come across one of your services and you would prefer that I not do this, for whatever reason, I will gladly not do it. But if you see the service pop up, speak up real quick and I will stop
declaring.
So let me just pull back here. And we'll play a couple spots along, and I think we should have some meters going on over here. If it's too loud again, let me know. For those that do not have, David's saying on Facebook, for those who don't have a way to mix the live stream with a DAW console or iPad, what would be a good setup? If you don't have a way to mix the live stream with a separate console, David, is that what you're saying? Or a DAW or an iPad? What I was saying before is that setting all of your worship inputs on an aux, -15, your preachers at like 0, or and going from there as a standard, and then keep making sure that those are post fader aux contributions, so that when you turn it up in the house, it goes up in the live stream a little bit. When you bring it down, it goes down. That usually works out pretty good. The other thing is you got to make sure that your room is treated and PA is tuned appropriately, because if it's way off kilter, that'll never really help you. You'll always be kind of fighting and chasing and tweaking and all that kind of stuff. But it is like that church that we were talking to recently, where they were wanting to add a console. People were telling them to add a console. We were, you know, I was probably the only friend / consultant, if you could call it, that suggested, hey, let's take that money that you're going to spend and consider treating your room and tuning your PA again, and then you don't have to have another console and a whole another volunteer to train, because it can absolutely work and work to the degree that it's acceptable. Right now, obviously, if you add a DAW or console, it's going to, you know, your opportunity to improve is better, but making that one change can increase it 80%, 90% even, and then that last 10%, it could be later on adding another console. That one will work. Okay, let's play this. If it's too loud, let me know. I'll bring it down in OBS. But see how his love overcomes. He has done great things. He has done great things. Oh, hero of heaven, you conquer the grave. You free every captive and break every chain. Oh God, you have done great things. We dance in your freedom, awakened to love. Oh Jesus, our Savior, your name lifted high. Oh God. So you see this up here, this is a True Peak readout. Come on, here we go. You've been faithful through every storm. This is good. You'll be faithful forevermore. You have done great things. So I really like what I'm hearing here. So a couple things I'm hearing. So I'll bring this down a little bit while I talk. A couple things I'm hearing. I'm hearing the space is matching what I'm seeing quite well. So another tip as I'm going to turn down and listen. And I'm hearing everything. I'm hearing all the guitars, the keyboard, all the vocals. This is done really, really well. Great job, Keith. So I'm not hearing too much auto-tune happening there. Keith can probably speak more to that. He's over on Facebook, Mark. If there is auto-tune on there, it's nice and smooth. But that's the thing with auto-tune. It's one of those things where that's one of the risks you run. Having auto-tune or Waves Tune Live going on. Let's pop forward a little bit.
Over your circumstances, over your hearts today.
Yeah, the space on this is really good, really nice. If there was a crowd in this room, remember this is during the pandemic, but if there was a crowd in this room, I feel like we could hear them really well. Either that or the reverb that Keith picks is yeah, there we go. So that Keith can speak to this a little bit, but that space, whatever it is, the reverb or the ambience, if it's ambience mics, then they're placed well. If it's reverb, then it's a really well pick on the reverb. Noatpour, what are you specifically talking about? How do you make sure that the low end doesn't muddy up the sound? We'll get to that. There's actually a couple of examples, I think, through this. I tried to do subtle tuning via Waves Tune LT. Is that the live one, Keith, or is that the newer one? I'm not sure. I'll have to look it up. I never had a great success with that one. Let's see, we're like Waves Tune LT. Okay, so if this is the LT, I never have good results with this one. It's a blend of the ambience and a plate with H-Verb. H-Verb's really good. So, Keith, my recommendation here is look at this plugin. Instead of the LT, you can get a little bit more natural results out of it. I never liked the flicks that you get from LT, and I don't even know if it's the way that they tweak the algorithm or whatever. This one, when I tried this one, it seemed to be a lot better. Because this one I can hear tuning quite evidently. The other thing is it's picking some notes that are not for split seconds that's making the vibrato go a little too far. So I'm gonna pop throw it forward a little. Nice balance. You do have so if you notice, I'll go roll back, but you've got a fair bit of 90 60, so 60 to 70 I believe it is on the left side. So I'm not sure what's going on with that, but maybe one suggestion would be to get a mono maker happening and take all this low end below 110 or whatever, make that more mono. Or make it, it'll balance it out a little bit. Now, keyboard and tracks, sometimes you get a little bit of width in your low end, but I don't, subjectively speaking, I don't think that really helps this genre. Tightening up that monoing out that low end might actually make it sound and work better on more formats. So, okay, so here's something I wanted to go over real quick. Yeah, I've never used Melodyne Live. You may want to small maybe comments would be a little bit more on the snare top, a little bit less on the snare bottom, but tiny bits. Although that and that could be a sample. You could be running a sample on top of that too. It could just be the sample's a little too loud. All right, listen to this transition.
Wow, it is so powerful to declare who our God is and to lift his name at this moment.
Okay,
wherever you may be watching today, I want to
did anybody notice the difference in tonal landscape, I guess you will? So from worship to this, we're presenting a lot more in the low mids and a lot less in the upper mids. Okay, and to me that made it sound like this is a little bit muddy, even though after we listen to this for a few seconds,
I lead you in prayer and pray over you today. I want to encourage you to just lift your
it's not offensive. It's not a terrible choice in toning out this mic. But things like that to pay attention to. So maybe it is a little bit dark, a little bit warm. You may consider maybe brightening it up at least for broadcast a little bit. Also, this is a good example. This wasn't a bad match in level, but let me do this for you. Let me reset the LKFS.
To you, and as their hearts go up in faith to you, Lord, that you would encourage them. May they know that they are not alone, that you're a God who never leaves us nor forsakes us. That God, even though the circumstances around us may seem to be pointing a different direction, we can trust that you're a God who's working behind the scenes. When we can't trust you, we can still, when we can't trace you, we can still trust you and know that you're working.
So
and you're doing things behind the scenes that we can't even
-16
see.
with a little bit of music
Lord,
behind
I
it.
pray that you would just lift up.
All right, well, looks like it's pretty consistent, but again, this is a post broadcast, so I don't know if YouTube has done anything to you there. Keith can speak more to this, whether or not he's actually trying to nail a particular LU, or if this is a result of YouTube sticking it to -16. But to me, the preaching felt a little quieter.
God, even though the circumstances around us may seem to be pointing a different direction,
so it actually is. This one wasn't as bad.
Enduring hardship, when called upon to defend and liberate, they said yes. They found courage to rise with every sun.
Yeah, it's pretty consistent.
Loyalty toward their country.
At this for the very first time, we just want to welcome
Okay, I
you
like
and know
this
that
one
we
too. It
consider
matches
you
the
part
other.
of the family.
It matches the
and
other
our hope and
mic
prayer is
and
that you
feel.
would be able to come and
they are not alone.
See that?
grace abound to you,
Tonally they
so
match,
that
which
in
is pretty
all
good.
things, at
Even
all
though we can see
times,
that the
having
headset,
all
which has
that
got a
you
bit of a
need,
different
you will abound
sensitivity
in
to
every
it.
good work. And it goes down in the next verse, in verse 10, it says, "Now he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will also supply and increase your
Yeah, no, that was really good. We're getting a little bit of chirpy distortion
store
here.
of seed and enlarge the harvest of your righteousness." I love that scripture because what it's really referring
So I would check your sensitivities between your transmitter and receiver. So that's a thing. But let's go back over to here. Let's go find another one to pull up. And I apologize if these come up loud. I will try to catch it if they do.
Morning, welcome to worship. Morning.
So
Today we are singing some really old songs. But before you click away,
this one I actually really loved.
to my listening ears,
Let me reset the LU.
all nature sings.
So here's,
around me
I ran into this a lot.
music of the sphere.
So I still have a ton of room.
This is my Father's world.
So I still have a ton of room to go up, but I was running across a bunch of mixes that were just a bit too loud. And if I turn them up, they start to distort, not in any particular output, but they're coming a little too close. This one doesn't distort as bad as some of the others. But this one is actually, this one again is also mixed really well. Now, you'll notice this one is a completely different genre. There's no drums or anything. And they're using, they might be Shores, but I think they're not. I think they're something else. The reason I don't think it's a Shore, otherwise it's got a lot of EQ on it, is that mic doesn't quite sound like a Shore, but my only comments for this, other than it being maybe a little too loud, is consider listening to some more acoustic music and how the acoustics are treated, because for me I think the acoustics just a little bit bright and could use, if there's tons of space here, to have some more body in the acoustics. And then let me see here. Yeah, okay, so there's some panning going on, which is good. And I'm not hearing too much of the other. Okay, so it's just really light. But yeah, so I would personally warm her voice up just a little. Warm the acoustics up a little bit so that we get a little bit more love down here. But this is great for the genre. This one was really great. Also love that they picked out some of the older songs to go with. Let's see here. Is this the one? Let's go. Let me turn this one down. Okay, so here's a good one. I don't know if this particular church was aware of this, but you see this straight line here and the straight line here? It is, I believe this is the one.